Denton Davidson here, senior editor for Gold Derby. With me is Felicity Morris, the Emmy-nominated writer and director of the Netflix documentary, The Tinder Swindler. First of all, Felicity, congratulations on your Emmy nomination. You're up for Best Writing for a Nonfiction Program. The film's also up for Best Documentary Nonfiction Special. And then you've also got music composition, picture editing, sound editing, an incredible accomplishment. So tell us how you heard the news about the Emmy nominations and where were you? What was your reaction?
I heard the news. I was actually on a call with a contributor doing a very tricky access call for a new project that I'm working on. So I had my computer on and I could see emails coming through. My phone was buzzing. So yeah, I was then stuck sort of on this call basically then for the next hour, and then had to very quickly get on another call. But obviously absolutely over the moon with all of the nominations. I mean, I think when we were making Tinder, we very quietly, the producer and I would say to each other, oh, do you think it's going to get to #1 on Netflix? So yeah, this has just been beyond our kind of expectations and what we would have ever hoped for.
You know, you've had so much success in this genre. What do you love most about the documentary genre? And, you know, what are the most important ingredients in creating a great documentary?
What I love about it is that you get to meet just the most, I mean, in the films and series that I've made, very much it's ordinary people who have experienced extraordinary things. You know, I haven't made a film yet about a music star or anything like that, but certainly the films that I've made have just been about people who have, for one reason or another, just been thrown into a wild, you know, you can't make this up kind of story. And I think for me, the best part of that is that you get to go into these people's homes, they trust you with their stories. And very much so, I think in the last couple of projects that I've done, the ambition has always been, if this was a movie, because really the stories that I've told with Don't Fuck with Cats and the Tinder Swindler, if you were scripting it as a movie, you couldn't make it up any better. And so I think that we have tried to kind of take that as much as possible in the filmmaking and think, if this was a movie, let's make a sort of a documentary movie, something that feels like a movie, something that unfolds like a movie. And then the second part of your question.
Oh, just what are the best ingredients for making a documentary?
I think obviously story comes first. And, you know, these sort of wild, unbelievable stories aren't easy to come by. But then second to that, you need the people to tell them. Yeah. And so it's not to say if somebody isn't a great storyteller, you know, it's the director's job, obviously, to try and get them to tell the best story in their story in the best possible way. But I think that with the Tinder Swindler, Don't Fuck with Cats, we were sort of really, really lucky in the group of people that we had to tell that story. I mean, when I first met Cecilia and Pernilla, they came into the offices in London and basically just spoke for an hour. They were so angry and so mad and so wanted Simon to get his comeuppance, you know, highs, lows, tears, laughter. And I think after that hour-long meeting with them, I sort of thought, oh my goodness me, there's absolutely no way that this isn't going to be an amazing film with, you know, these two women at the helm of it.
How did you first hear about this con artist named Simon, who was, you know, swindling these women out of money and then gallivanting around Europe pretending to be the son of a Russian billionaire? I mean, it's just wild.
You kind of wonder how everybody hadn't heard of him, given how prolific he was. So the reason that we heard about the story was because of the fact that Cecilia had gone to the press in Norway. So we interviewed the 3 Norwegian VG journalists. So Cecilia, at the point at which she'd gone to the police, they had essentially said, well, there's nothing that we can do. They were kind of blaming her for what happened, thought, well, how can I stop this man from doing what he's doing? Because I think she knew deep down inside that if he was doing it to her, he was probably doing it to other women. So she went to the press, and VG wrote an amazing article. We used some of their footage when they went over to Tel Aviv to try and sort of track Simon down. They wrote a piece that they fortunately published in English, and then it meant that it was sort of picked up by different, news agencies and so on across the world, and that was how we found it. And then got in touch with Cecilia and Pernilla, but the point at which we came onto the story, we didn't know anything about Eileen, and VG, those journalists, hadn't spoken to her. So that was something that came, that sort of amazing ending with her came up throughout the course of making the film.
And how did you know that they were going to be ready to give their full story? Because it has to be humiliating. I mean, Cecilia, to open up with her, I mean, she's just a brave human being to just be that forthcoming. But what was it like meeting her and making sure she had your trust that you were going to portray her in a good light? Because this could have been very embarrassing for her and all of the women.
I think from the very beginning, we knew that we needed the audience to experience the con for themselves, almost very much through the eyes of Cecilia. And we spoke about that with her, sort of, obviously saying that we want to tell the story right from the start. And in order for the audience to understand how you got swept up in the con and understand how Simon worked, you have to very much take yourself back there and relive that experience. But that's not to say that was obviously the only conversation that we had. I worked in partnership with a producer, Bernadette Higgins, and Cecilia's based in London, so we had sort of met up with London and went on walks with her during lockdown. Bernie did, hours and hours and hours of research calls with both Pernilla and Cecilia, and I think it was just building that trust. And as they get used to the way that we were sort of asking questions and really getting to know them. With Cecilia, we wanted to understand why an experience and why a man like Simon would sweep her off her feet, why she was looking for love like that. All of these women are vulnerable from the start because they're swiping on Tinder. I always say that, swiping on Tinder is an act of vulnerability. You're basically saying, hey, I'm looking for something, I might be a bit lonely. But we just knew that if the audience were ahead of the game, sort of too much at any point in the film, that they wouldn't go with these women on the journey. And we just wanted the audience to sort of, we called it the Simon experience. Yeah. So that first date with Cecilia, we wanted to kind of relive that and have her relive it. But it's definitely not easy. And Cecilia, when she sat down in the interview at first, she talked about the first kiss and she got really upset, but that was obviously because of the fact that she's kind of mourning this relationship still, even though he did what he did to her. And so we had to sort of go back on the second day and do it with her again, because obviously in that moment she wouldn't have been crying. Yeah. But they did an amazing job. It's not easy sitting the other side of the camera. I think we sort of forget, being this side, how hard it is.
And she even sort of admitted she had this Beauty and the Beast fantasy of like finding this prince, and he sort of checked all those boxes. The look of this documentary is so cool. Talk to me about your decision to weave interviews in with images of like Tinder and WhatsApp, and like how do you weave all of those things together and get that to look so seamless? We feel like we're in on those messages.
Well, that's exactly what we wanted, is for the people watching to feel like they were in the phone. I always think that when you're, when in those first early days of a relationship, when you're messaging someone and you're hoping they're going to message you back, and you get that little ping on your WhatsApp and it's sort of a little dopamine hit, all of those elements we really wanted for the audience to understand and experience. And then, as things go darker, the kind of sound design grew darker, those pings were more sinister rather than as being as bright and airy at the start. But essentially what we had is Cecilia, Pernilla, Eileen sent us over their entire WhatsApps with Simon. So all of the texts, unfiltered, all of the videos, all of the photos. So before we even did interviews with them, we basically had that archive available to us. And I started scripting basically between, what we would expect for them to say after the research calls that we had, but then also putting into the script the messages, because on the WhatsApp, reading through it is essentially a kind of a roadmap of how Simon does this, how he lures them in. And they were kind of real relationships in real life, but a lot of it was also lived on phones in the way that many of us kind of live, large portions of friendships, whatever, on our phones. So in terms of the graphics, we knew that we wanted them to be a huge part of the film. And it was sort of trial and error about how that might work. And in the end, we had an assistant producer called John Mark, who had one iPhone that was two iPhones, one that was a Cecilia phone, one that was Simon. And then we basically had to screen record all of those text messages again. So going from the log, going from the archive. So I think between him and the editor, Julian, they screen recorded 1,000 graphics. So it was just hard work, really. But then once you get the hang of it, and once you then go back through the WhatsApps thinking, okay, well, this is a great message there. Maybe we don't need to tell that in interview. Maybe we can sort of, let that land via text. But yeah, so that was the process, but it's obviously was hugely time consuming, making this entire set of rushes basically at the point of the edit. So not only was Jules editing, he was also, we were also recreating, creating the graphics.
You talk about like what things that you had to script. You're nominated for writing, and just for people out there that aren't familiar, talk about what that process is like for you as a documentary filmmaker, because a lot of people think it's nonfiction. What are you writing? Like, talk about scripting this documentary and what goes into that process.
Yeah. So if you're making an observational documentary, you're not going to be able to script as tightly because things are sort of unfolding. But with this story, it's retrospective, so it's all happened. So the process basically involves spending hours on research calls with all of the contributors to get them to tell you their story, but in a kind of free and space where you're not under time constraints. Get them to tell you the whole story, everything that matters to them. And then you get, basically what we also did is we got hold of as much archive as we could have as possible. So from the Norwegian newspaper, we got hold of their archive. And then obviously we had all of these WhatsApps as well. And then I can't even remember how long it took, but across the course of a month or so, I then deduced all of that into a script for the film. So in the right hand, I split it into two columns. In the right hand column, should be this side, I had all of the wish sync, all of the things that people had, told us. And then in the left was all the sort of visuals and all of the texts, the WhatsApps that we were going to use, because we knew that there would be parts of the story that we wanted in the interview for the women to be jumping off a message. They've just received this text, and how does it make them feel? And essentially what that enables you to do is, because we didn't have a narrator in this, is that all of the turning points you can quite tightly, or as tightly as can be, structure those and make sure that the contributors are speaking about them. The points at which you're going to build and where a twist is going to come in. And then it also just, I think, allows for confidence when you sit down in your interview that, I know sort of exactly what this film is going to be. Sometimes things change if a contributor tells you something that they hadn't told you before. But I think it also gives them the confidence that their story really well. And your job as director is to sit there and help them tell it in the best way.
And we also see scenes that sort of flash back to life a little bit, and that you have actors with sort of blurred faces, and it makes us feel like we're there, and like this sushi's like rolled out on the table. How long is that process taking for you to decide, you know, okay, I want to shoot a scene of this? What's the thought process there?
I think with visuals, it's the way that I think about it is, especially in a documentary, if you don't have any archive, you know, and we obviously had videos, phone videos, that kind of thing. If you don't have the archive to tell that bit of the story, then it's really good to use visuals. And we obviously didn't have any archive of these incredible, luxurious dates that Simon was taking these women on. And so, particularly with Cecilia, we wanted to visualize that experience for the audience. The, you know, turning up at a 5-star hotel, being led into a very fancy tea room. We also wanted the audience to kind of see and experience a bit more as to what it's like sitting across the table from Simon, or sitting across the table from, you know, a first date who you really fancy, and you're taking in, you know, their smell or their feel or their, you know, the cut of their jawline or whatever. So we kind of wanted for the audience to sort of see what Simon was like in a 3-dimensional way, outside of just his Tinder pictures or videos that he was sending. So that was the reason why we recreated the dates, you know, to sort of sweep the audience up into it. And then the other parts of the story was, again, it's sort of, where don't we have the archive? Where do we want the audience to kind of feel like they're right at the fingertips of these women on their phones, swiping, or, you know, Eileen on the plane at the end, where she's sort of discovering from the VG article and from the messages that Simon's been sending her that she too has been a victim of exactly the same con.
I mean, how much did your jaw drop when you found out Eileen had figured out what plane he was on? I mean, the ending there, I mean, just when you thought like more things couldn't happen, I was like, this is just unbelievable. Like that she sort of figured out like, oh, his and you get back into that WhatsApp, like, oh, his check marks aren't blue. He's not reading, he's on a plane. So, I mean, she figures it out using this technology. What was it like to hear that for the first time?
We couldn't believe it. So Eileen we knew about Eileen because Eileen had been in touch with Pernilla, but we didn't know the full extent of her story at all. We just knew that she was dating him at the time that he had been arrested and that she had gone to the cops. And then the producer Bernie worked extremely hard to sort of gain her trust. And at first she sort of said, okay, I'll speak, but I don't want to be on camera. And then she said, I'll speak, but I want to be anonymous, because she just felt so ashamed about what had happened to her and thought that she would be laughed at, you know, on a global platform. And so we just encouraged her that actually, you know, your story, you're one of the heroes of this, and we want to present all 3 women as heroes in their own way. It's kind of, you know, the baton passing. Had Cecilia not have gone to the press, then Pernilla wouldn't have found out, and then Eileen wouldn't have found out. But because Eileen told us the story, but then she handed over her WhatsApps, and of course, like, it's there in black and white, all of the messages that she was sending, all of the stuff, you know, she sent us the emails that she was sending the cops, all of the kind of cunning work that she was doing behind the scene, the way that she was playing, you know, as soon as she realized what Simon was up to and the fact that he had nothing without her money or without anybody else's money, because he'd already by that point been exposed by the VG article, it was just joy reading kind of how she was like holding him up like a little mouse by his tail, and there was no escape, you know. And then seeing him then, or hearing him then, lose his composure at the point at which he's saying, you know, I'm in a hostel, I'm eating leftovers off dinner plates in a shopping mall, and then him getting angrier and angrier and angrier as Eileen's selling his clothes. I mean, it's an ending that we could not have written ourselves, and we just loved working with Eileen, and we loved the fact that she had the balls to do what she did.
I love that part of him losing it. It's like the most gratification, I think, in the film. It's just him like living in a hostel. Did the Leviathan family ever say anything about him claiming to be in their family? Because that's just very odd for them to not say anything when this is all happening around them. Have they ever publicly said anything about him that you know of?
They have since. So they watched the film, which I think for them, I think that they were aware that somebody was using their name, because Simon had, he went to prison in Israel. And so that I think they knew about that, but then they actually, I think they watched the film and realized what he was saying and how he was using their name. And I think that they filed a lawsuit against him in Israel for defamation, and they've collaborated with Cecilia Panilla and Eileen on an item of jewelry, which is called Stronger Together. So yeah, I think they're definitely unhappy with the fact that he was pretending to be, part of that family, and have spoken out saying he has nothing to do with us and he needs to stop saying that he is.
And then he spent 5 months in prison for after all of this, and then he gets out and he's like launching a business website. He's back on social media, with his fancy cars. What is happening? How does that happen? Like, where is he getting money now? It's just mind-boggling.
I know. So I have no idea, but I think you've always got to take whatever Simon is putting up on social media with a pinch of salt. It's sort of very easy, I think, to pretend you're on a private jet. I think you can actually pay a certain amount of money just to go and take a picture on a private jet, or driving around in a Lamborghini, or whatever it might be. I think that whatever Simon was putting out is sort of just has to be taken with a pinch of salt.
And you asked him if he wanted to be part of it. Did part of you think he's such a narcissist, maybe he will? Or did you think, he's not going to, but we'll ask anyway?
Well, I contacted him. So I developed the film before it was commissioned. And the point at which I was developing it and getting some access, I contacted his lawyer, because at that point no one knew where he was. We know now that he was in Prague hiding out. And basically then Simon was extradited from Greece back to Israel, and then served his sentence. And then the day before he was released early, his lawyer called me and said, "Hey, Simon's getting out of prison tomorrow and would really like to speak to you." So then the following morning, ring, 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 my phone rings, or ping, ping, ping. And then I picked up and it was him. And I sort of said, "Look, I'm making this documentary, working with Cecilia and Panilla to tell their story." And he was sort of saying, he would like to be involved. And then we said, well, let's speak to your lawyers, because obviously we'd want a release form signed, that kind of thing. And then that conversation went very quiet. And then Simon, about 6 months later, got back in touch. I woke up to 23 WhatsApp messages from him one morning, where he had sent me through all of these like news articles, essentially saying that Netflix was paying him millions of dollars to take part in a documentary series about his life, about him being an entrepreneur, about how he's made money from Bitcoin, and property. And wow. I just sort of sent him a voice note back, I think, because I'd always send him a voice note to try and get the voice note back, but sent him a voice note saying, "Hi, Simon, that sounds exciting. Is that our documentary that you're talking about? Let us know," kind of thing. I think he just thought that if he said it, then we'd believe it. It's kind of like if he says it, then seeing is believing, and it will kind of happen. It was very bizarre. And then didn't hear anything. And then just before, as we were sort of in the last couple of months of the edit, he got back in touch again and sent that voice note that you hear at the end of the film, saying that he will, get his lawyers onto us and sue us for defamation, as he called it.
But no such thing happened. So
no such thing has happened. No.
Wow. Felicity, congratulations on a great film. Best of luck at the Emmys. To our viewers, head over to goldderby.com, make your Emmy predictions, check out more interviews with this year's nominees. Felicity, once again, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today about the Tinder Swindler.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.